This is part 2 of Should the number 1,000 in Revelation 20 be interpreted literally? As I mentioned in the previous segment, I'm responding to Jim McClarty of Grace Christian Assembly, who gives what I would say a reasoned response to my video clip, and it was just a clip that I had done a couple of years ago, more than a couple of years ago, when asked a question about how I interpreted Revelation chapter 20 in the 1,000 years. And I mentioned in the last segment that in order to get the whole dispensational system, you have to ignore time text like near and shortly. Here you find, and I believe that the book of Revelation was written prior to the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. Revelation chapter 11, John is told to measure the temple. There is no indication in the book of Revelation or anywhere else in the New Testament that this is a rebuilt temple, and that's something I'll talk about in a moment. In order to make these time indicators near and shortly and quickly valid, you have to have prophetic events that are on the horizon, not something that's postponed so far nearly 2,000 years. And now, how does the dispensationalist get to the point where Revelation 20 and actually Revelation chapter 4 through Revelation chapter 20 is pushed in the distant future? They have to go to Daniel's prophecy, Daniel chapter 9, verses 24 through 27, and where 70 weeks of years is prophesied, 490 years. And nearly everybody agrees that the first 483 years takes you up to the time of Christ, but the dispensationalist comes in and says, aha, but there's a gap between the 69th week and the 70th week, the gap between the 483 years up to the time of Christ and the last 7 years, which takes up Revelation chapter 4 through Revelation chapter 19. So we are living in this parenthesis, in this gap. Now, for someone who claims that you need to take the Bible literally, which, by the way, I do agree with, when you compare Scripture with Scripture, there's nothing in Daniel chapter 9 that says that there's a gap. And especially since Daniel is reading Jeremiah's prophecy, specifically Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 10, which talks about that the time of the captivity, the Babylonian captivity, is going to be 70 years. So you got 70 years of captivity, 70 weeks of years. There is no gap between the 69th and 70th year of the captivity. Therefore, there shouldn't be a gap between the 69th and the 70th week of Daniel, weeks of years. Now, this is important because one of the things that Pastor McClarty makes is that when you start studying time references like numbers, you have to be aware of whether or not there is a comparison going on. If there's no comparison going on, and he maintains in Revelation chapter 20 that there's no comparison, Revelation number 1,000 isn't being compared to a day, 1,000 isn't being compared to 100 years. It's just stated as 1,000. So therefore, you have to take it literally. Well, if that's the case in Revelation chapter 20, then the same has to be the case in Daniel chapter 9. If the comparison is the 70 weeks of years and the 70 years of captivity, 70 years of captivity does not have a gap, why then should there be a gap between the 69th and the 70th week of Daniel's 70 weeks of years? And so in order to get a rebuilt temple, you have to see in Daniel chapter 9 a rebuilt temple. But it doesn't say there's a rebuilt temple. In fact, the New Testament doesn't say a single thing about a rebuilt temple. And I made this point in the video clip that Pastor McClarty is responding to. There's nothing about a rebuilt temple in the book of Revelation. Revelation 20 doesn't say anything about it. The Old Testament does, in fact, talk about a rebuilt temple. And in fact, the temple was rebuilt. If you study the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, you know that the temple was rebuilt. This is the same temple that was defiled in the 2nd century BC by Antiochus Epiphanes. This is the same temple that was reconstructed by Herod. It was the same temple that Jesus cleansed. It was the same temple that he said, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I'll raise it back up again. And his respondents thought they were talking about the temple that was standing before them. It's the same temple that Jesus talked about, said it was going to be destroyed when he gave his prophecy in the Olivet Discourse. He says, not one stone here will be left upon another. And Pastor McClarty says, but the 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, the temple is mentioned there. Yeah, read 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. It says nothing about a rebuilt temple. The epistles to the Thessalonians are written around AD 50. The temple was still standing. I'm not going to go through all of the exegesis on 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. I have two very long chapters in my book, Last Days Madness, on 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. And I don't know if Pastor McClarty is aware of those. Probably not. So you can't appeal to 2 Thessalonians 2 and the mention of the temple and say that's a rebuilt temple. You can't look at the temple in Matthew chapter 24, verse 15, where the abomination of desolation is going to be set up, because there the Olivet Discourse is describing what's going to happen to that particular generation. Notice the second person plural, when you see the abomination of desolation. So there's not a single passage in the entire New Testament that says anything about a rebuilt temple. Now, Pastor McClarty goes back to Ezekiel chapter 40, and he says there's an indication of the rebuilt temple that hasn't been built yet. But that doesn't fit the context at all. Revelation 20 doesn't have any indication that Ezekiel's temple is going to be built during that period of time. And actually, if you want to see where Ezekiel's temple probably has some significance, it's in Revelation chapter 21 after the 1,000 years of Revelation chapter 20. And he says, John says, and I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth passed away, and there is no longer any sea. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, made ready as a bride adorned for her husband. So this New Jerusalem, which probably includes a new temple, comes down out of heaven. This is very similar to what we see in Ezekiel chapter 40. In the visions of God, verse 2 of Ezekiel chapter 40, he brought me into the land of Israel and set me on a very high mountain, and on it to the south there was a structure like a city. So he brought me there, and behold, there was a man whose appearance was like the appearance of bronze, with a line of flax and a measuring rod in his hand. And he was standing in the gateway. And the man said to me, Son of man, see with your eyes, hear with your ears, and give attention to all that I'm going to show you, for you have been brought here in order to show it to you. Declare to the house of Israel all that you see. See, this is in a vision, in the visions of God, just very much like John. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and first earth passed away. And you'll notice that Ezekiel does not measure the temple. John measures the temple in Revelation chapter 11. Ezekiel does not measure this temple. Someone else measures the temple. This is a visionary temple. And since Revelation chapter 20 mentions Gog and Magog, which is going all the way back to Ezekiel 38 and 39, this other temple is mentioned in chapter 40. One would expect, since Gog and Magog is mentioned at the end of Revelation 20, that Ezekiel chapter 40 actually fits with Revelation chapter 21. So there's no mention of a temple in chapter 20. All of the things necessary for a premillennial view of Revelation chapter 20, you don't find in Revelation chapter 20. Now, you can try to fit those things in there, but it seems to me that if this is their passage to teach a millennial reign of Jesus on the earth, some indication should be that that's what you find in Revelation chapter 20, but you don't find those elements there. Now, there is no doubt that that Revelation chapter 20 is an enigmatic passage. There are all types of things in there that people have debated over for nearly 2,000 years. And for someone who claims to interpret the Bible literally to come on and say that 1,000 in there is literal, is a literal 1,000 years because it's not being compared with anything, I think goes far beyond what the passage is trying to articulate. And so in the next session, I'm going to come back and deal with the actual use of the 1,000 in Revelation chapter 20, and to show that it is a number dealing with comparison.
Gary DeMar and American Vision are excited to present this year's Worldview Super Conference in Marietta, Georgia, this July 21st through 24th. For more information, visit conference.americanvision.org. That's conference.americanvision.org.